Okay, in this video, I'm going to walk you through how to choose which statistical test to use. And this is really a fairly difficult task. I would say that this is the thing that I have a lot of people come to my office about. What statistical test should I use in my data analysis? And sometimes these are people who are working on dissertations, so that type of thing. So, or sometimes they've been colleagues, faculty members who've come in to ask this. So this is give me a heads up. This is a little tricky, but what I have for you here is this table, this decision table to use in deciding what test to use. And a couple things to note: some of the tests that are listed here are tests that we haven't even talked about. Okay, don't be intimidated by that. It's just whether or not you can use the table to get to a particular answer. The other thing I'll say is, honestly, in certain situations, the correct answer, there can be a couple correct answers. And sometimes it's researcher preference, or there's other reasons for the decision that they might use for the test that they would use in the analysis. So you'll notice we've got 4 columns here. This first column is about how many dependent variables do you have. The second column is about the nature of the independent variable. Okay, how many do you have, and how many levels are in the dependent variable, and are the groups independent of one another, or are they dependent of one another? An example of dependent would be a repeated measures type of design. And then this third column is the nature of the dependent variable. Remember, this is from early on in the class. Is it an interval scale? Is it an ordinal scale or interval scale? Is it and you'll notice here it doesn't even have ratio scale. If you look at it and you say, oh, that's a ratio scale, just assume it's an interval scale then. Okay, just go with that for the interval scale. And for us as well, you'll notice they're saying interval and normal, that it has a normal distribution. For the purposes of this exercise, just assume the normal distribution. I say that out of, if you remember the conversation we had about the conversation that we had about the central limit theorem, is that as soon as your sample size gets to be pretty large, the distribution of sample means will become normal, even if your original distribution is not. And then this last one is then the test that you would use to run the analysis. So let's go through a couple examples with this. I'll walk you through this. So for this first example, Darley and Latané asked subjects to participate in a discussion carried on over an intercom. Aside from the experimenter to whom they were speaking, subjects thought there was either 0, 1, or 4 other people, bystanders, listening over the intercoms. That's an important aspect here. Okay, so the bystander seems to be one of the independent variables, and there's 3 levels to that: either no bystander, 1, or 4. Partway through the discussion, the experimenter feigned serious illness and asked for help. Darley and Latané noted whether or not the subject sought help for the experimenter as a function of the number of supposed bystanders. Okay, so what that's meaning is the dependent variable is whether or not they helped. Okay, so the dependent variable is, did they help or did they not help? Notice that's categorical, right? That we have for our dependent variable. Our independent variable, we seem to only have one independent variable that has 3 levels to it, right? For that condition. So let's go back to our table then with the information that we have. So the number of dependent variables, we just have 1. The nature of the independent variables, well, we have 1 independent variable with 2 or more levels to it. The nature of our dependent variable, remember we said that was categorical. So the test we would use, that's the chi-square test that you would use for that particular example. Let's go through one more. So in the second one, as part of a program to reduce smoking, a national organization ran an advertising campaign to convince people to quit smoking. To evaluate the effectiveness of their campaign, they had 15 subjects record the average number of cigarettes smoked per day in the week before and the week after exposure to the advertisement. What test should be used? So for this, what do we have? We seem to have, we're looking at a before and after. Okay, so the subjects, we've got a repeated measures design. It's dependent off of that. There's just 2 times where we're getting information for the participant, and then average number of cigarettes smoked per day is our dependent variable. So we go back here. For this, we've got one dependent variable, and we've got one independent variable with 2 levels, but they're matched. They're dependent, right? Our dependent variable, I would say, would be an interval, right? Or it's really kind of ratio. How many cigarettes did you smoke? And so we've got a paired t-test. Sometimes in the course we've called this a repeated measures t-test or a related measures t-test. And so that would be the option that we would choose for this particular one, the related or repeated measures t-test. So let's look at one more example here. The study examining the relationship between temperature and violent aggression. Anderson recorded the temperature and the number of murders per day in a major southwestern city. So the statistic that they would use for this one, so we got a variable of temperature, we got a variable of number of murders. We're looking at the relationship between those two variables. So we have dependent variable, one dependent variable, independent variable that is on an interval scale, right? For that. So for our temperature off of that is on an interval scale. Our dependent variable, the number of murders a day, would actually be on a ratio scale, so interval certainly fits for this. So either a correlation or a simple linear regression. Either one would be fine functionally. Either one will give you the same answer for that. And then one last one here. Psychologist is interested in seeing the type of therapy that works best for treating depression. 80 people were diagnosed as being clinically depressed, randomly assigned to one of 4 conditions. So we've got drug therapy, cognitive therapy, group therapy, or placebo control. So you notice this, they were randomly assigned to one of 4 conditions. So the treatment is one of the independent variables, and it's got 4 levels to it. After 1 month, scores on the Beck Depression Inventory are obtained for each subject. So we're using the BDI as a dependent variable. Scores range from 0 to 63, so that would be on an interval scale. So what statistic would we use for this particular one? We've got one independent variable. We've got one dependent variable that's on an interval scale. So one dependent variable, one independent variable with 2 or more levels, right? We had 4 levels to that. We said the dependent variable is on an interval scale, so we would use a one-way ANOVA for that particular example. So I hope this helps you with your homework. Don't get, if you find this difficult to do, I'm just reminding you, a lot of people find it difficult to do. Just take your time working through this example here, using this table to try to determine what statistical test to use.